Well, may God richly bless you as we continue our study in Daniel chapter 6. The last of the first 6 chapters, which first half of the book, there's 12 chapters if you'll remember. The first 6 each contain one very special story. And chapter 6 is, it's the culmination of those 6 stories. Many scholars will say that the second half of Daniel was written by somebody else, or even both halves, whatever. The second half is totally different style. Doesn't mean different author. Okay, Daniel 6, verses 1 through 3. King Darius the Mede reorganized his kingdom. Chapter 5. We saw the end of the Babylonian kingdom. Chapter 6 begins, King Darius the Mede reorganized his kingdom into 120 provinces, each with a provincial governor. Daniel and 2 others were placed over the 120 provincial governors. These 3 senior governors were responsible for protecting the king's interests. It didn't take long for the king to realize that Daniel was an exceptional governor. So the king decided to place Daniel over all of his kingdom. We do not know how the Babylonians had divided their kingdom or how they organized it. It's assumed their kingdom was basically divided by conquered nations and or the languages that were spoken. That was the Babylonians. We're not sure. We are told that King Darius organized his kingdom into 120 provinces. Well, it was big. There's no record regarding the geographical divisions of these provinces, but we know his kingdom basically went from the edge of Egypt through most of Asia Minor, Turkey, all the way out through Iran, Iraq, down to the Persian Gulf, the whole Middle East. And, over 100 years later, in the book of Esther, the first verse, I think even, it says that there were 127 provinces in the Persian Empire. But that's 100 years later. Maybe they'd conquered a few more, maybe they split some, we don't know. Anyway, let's get back to the scriptures. Verses 4 through 5. When all of the governors and the other 2 senior governors learned about the king's decision regarding Daniel, they looked for any way they could accuse Daniel of doing anything wrong. But they found nothing. Daniel was not corrupt in any way. He was faithful to the king and fulfilled all of his duties without ignoring anything. Eventually, the other governors concluded that Daniel's only possible flaw was his faithfulness to God. Wow, what a nice flaw to have, huh? And, a lot of governors, rulers, they get into their position and then they start ignoring everything they're supposed to be doing. Well, I got here. I don't have to do anything. I'll let somebody else take care of it. And think about what this is saying. The top governors, all of whom probably had vast amounts of money, if not their own possession, at least under their control, they could not find a single thing Daniel had done wrong. And they could have investigated as deep as they wanted. They could have had the FBI, CIA, NSA all investigating, the Persian equivalent thereof. In our modern world, how many times have you heard someone say something like, everyone has a skeleton in their closet? Well, how many times has a big-time politician or a famous movie star, sports person, or a big-time minister, how many times have you heard about one of them getting caught doing something morally wrong? I mean, that most people are offended by, or think that they shouldn't be doing that in their position. Well, Daniel, not so much. Couldn't find a single thing. Now, certainly he wasn't perfect, but a whole lot closer than anyone else then and probably today. Do you agree? Think about it. Verses 6 through 9, that was when these governors went as a group to the king. Their greeting to the king began with the traditional, "May King Darius live forever." And they continued, "Your provincial governors, senior governors, as well as your advisors and other officials, all agree that your majesty should make a law that is strictly enforced. Announce that for 30 days, everyone in your great kingdom will be required to pray to you and no other God. If anyone violates your law, let them be thrown into a den of lions." O great king, put this law into writing so that it cannot be changed, since no law of the Medes and Persians can be revoked. King Darius put the law on paper. All right. Some shallow flattery, which blinds the king to the real purpose, and the trap is set. I mean, after all, it's just for 30 days. What's the big deal? Verse 10, when Daniel heard about the law, he went home, and as was his custom, he knelt down in front of his window that looked west toward Jerusalem and prayed to God, giving thanks to him. He did this 3 times a day, as he had always done. It seems likely that Daniel prayed in front of that window 3 times a day, always. That would be why the conspirators came up with the trap they had set. They'd probably seen that. You think we should all take time out for prayer every day? How much time? How many times? Okay, verses 11 through 12. The officials that had set this trap for Daniel all went and saw Daniel praying to his God, asking him for help. Then they went to the king and reminded him about the new law regarding 30 days of prayer to the king only, and that it outlawed praying to any other human or God. They reminded him that anyone who violated this law would be thrown into a den of lions. The king said the law was official, could not be revoked by the law of the Medes and Persians. Oh, the trap is sprung. And did you notice the officials that set the trap all went and saw Daniel praying? Of course, then they went to the king to spring the trap. And they didn't say Daniel up front. They just reminded him about, that this law was there. So verse 13 and 14. After the king said that, the officials told the king that Daniel, one of the captives from Judah, was ignoring the king's law and that he was praying to his God 3 times a day. Hearing this, the king was quite upset. Not with Daniel, but because he did not want to throw Daniel into a den of lions. He spent the rest of that day looking for any way to protect Daniel. All right. Well, I like that. The king realizes he's been tricked. We aren't told that, but it becomes obvious, not just here, but by the end of the story. And the king did his best to find a way to protect Daniel, but there was no way he could help Daniel. That was their laws. And even kings had to obey certain laws. Even the greatest, mightiest king that nobody could do anything against in ancient days, if they did not obey the rules, the people would not trust them. It would often result in rebellion. Notice the officials told the king, not just Daniel, but Daniel, one of the captives from Judah. Trying to make sure he knows, no doubt, us who is, and he's not one of us. Verse 15, that evening the officials went to the king again, all of them. They reminded the king that no law of the Medes and Persians can be changed once the king puts the law in writing. So he spent all day trying to figure out some way to protect Daniel. Do you wonder what the conspirators were doing during that day? Were they worrying and stressing? Were they trying to figure out how long they had to wait before going back to the king? Maybe they were trying to figure out how to approach the king. No doubt they knew the king did not want to throw Daniel into the den of lions. I mean, after all, the king liked Daniel. That's why all of this was happening. So verse 16, reluctantly the king gave the order, and Daniel was thrown into a den of lions. The king told Daniel, may your God, to whom you are always faithful, rescue you. Wow. Reluctantly. Everyone knew the king did not want to do this. No doubt everyone was standing there and heard the king tell Daniel that he hoped Daniel's God would rescue him. Wow, that's respect. 17, a large stone was put over the opening of the den of lions. I got to stop there. A large stone. I never heard that when I was hearing this story in sermons or Sunday school class or whatever. A large stone was put over the tomb of Jesus. I never heard it. A large stone was put over the opening of the den of lions. Interesting. I just always imagined it as, a big pit or something. That's what the pictures show. A large stone was put over the opening of the den of lions, and the king sealed it with his signet ring and the signet rings of his nobles. This would prevent everyone from helping Daniel. Speaking of everyone, do you think the word nobles here meant the conspirators? Well, looking at the Aramaic, Daniel used a different word. So it would seem the conspirators were probably there, but the king's nobles were there. With their signet rings added to the king's, nobody could rescue Daniel without everyone knowing someone had rescued him. And I have no doubt there was probably a guard, typically a minimum of 2 guards. That helps prevent bribing. In this case, there might have been quite a few guards. What do you think? Verse 18, the king went back to his palace and spent the night without eating, without his usual entertainment. He did not sleep at all that night. Certainly the king's closest servants knew of his unusual behavior that night. What was his usual entertainment? Oh my goodness. Let's keep this PG-13. I know where most of our minds go with the way kings lived in those days. He was by himself. He couldn't sleep. He wouldn't eat. Verses 19 to 20, as the sun's light became visible in the morning, the king rushed to the den of lions, and he anxiously called out to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, to whom you are always faithful, rescued you? I get excited hearing the king calling out to God. Doesn't that get you excited? I mean, this is the king. And we aren't told, but evidently the den of lions sentence was an overnight type of deal. You throw them in and come check them out in the morning. Can you imagine the king staring out of his window? Do you think he was on the palace of his roof so he could, the roof of his palace, the palace of his roof? Do you think he was standing up as high as he could get so he could see the first hint of sunlight? And then he rushed. Do you think the other nobles or the conspirators all went with the king that morning? I kind of think so. They kind of expected the king to rush on. You know what I'm saying? And can you imagine when the king gets there, his quick commands, remove that stone. Do you think everyone was silent while waiting for the stone to be moved? Can you imagine the king calling out to Daniel, worried, anxious, hopeful? How would the nobles and conspirators and the guards have considered the king's concern? That is not normal. I've said it before, kings in those days were trained not to show emotion. But life happens, and sometimes they do. Can you imagine the king's emotions at this moment and how the people there, the nobles, the guards, and the conspirators, they'd each have different reactions Some nobles one way, some another. All the conspirators the same. The guards the same, This is weird. Verses 21 and 22. Daniel responded, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel to close the mouths of the lions. They have not harmed me in any way. God has found me innocent because I have never done anything against you, my king." I got to ask you, who was most shocked to hear Daniel speak? The king? Probably not. He sort of believed in Daniel's God, right? Maybe the nobles. But again, probably not. They were probably a little apathetic. Perhaps some of them already knew about Daniel's God. The conspirators would probably have been shocked. I think they'd have been the most shocked. Don't you agree? Can you imagine looks on their faces? They want to do... I mean, can you imagine them looking at each other? Can you imagine them sneaking peeks at the king, afraid to look him in the eye? Hearing Daniel's response, the king was extremely happy and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den of lions. It was immediately apparent that Daniel didn't even have a scratch because he trusted in his God. Oh, imagine the king's joy. Think about the difference in his voice between "remove the stone" and, or would have been, "remove the stone," and then "lift Daniel out of there," or "lift Daniel out of there." What do you imagine it would have been like? Can you imagine the king looking Daniel over closely? And he can't even see a scratch in his robe. Do you think the nobles crowded around too? Seems likely. Don't you agree? I mean, they're the king's nobles. But can you imagine the conspirators standing back, not wanting to get too close to Daniel? Were they worried about showing interest? Or were they worried about reminding the king they were there? Do you think they were whispering to each other? What would they have been saying? What do we do? What happened? How do we go wrong? What's the king going to do? I don't know. Well, verse 24. That was when the king commanded that all of the men who had conspired against Daniel be thrown into the den of lions, including their wives and children. As they were being lowered into the den of lions, the lions tore them apart before they even touched the floor. Imagine they were lowering them with ropes, don't you think? No doubt the king was not violating any of the laws of the Medes and Persians and exercising his authority in a manner that people would understand. You got to put to death the people that try and take down one of the king's own people. Do you think the conspirators were there through all this? I do. It seems likely. All of them? Yeah, probably. Do you think their wives and children were there too? I don't think so for many reasons, but I don't know. But why would the king have the wives and children thrown into the den of lions? Have you thought about that? It would mean, we don't usually hear that in the stories. You know, it's usually a lot of sermons stop with Daniel being rescued. But those that go on and say the conspirators were thrown in, doesn't usually say wives and children too. Why would the king do that? Again, culture. I try and teach you culture. Understand the culture. It would mean the entire family line of those men would be ended. Why would that be important? Think about it. Because there would be no one to seek revenge. How many times throughout history does something bad happen to a man and his son grows up and takes revenge? Hollywood loves that theme. Well, it happens. So pay attention to what the king says. And it's what I'm going to finish with. And he's going to say this to absolutely everyone in his kingdom. 25 through 28. King Darius then sent a message to every nation, to everyone, regardless of the language they spoke. His message was, peace and prosperity to all. I command that everyone in every part of my kingdom I command to everyone in every part of my kingdom that Daniel's God must be respected and honored. He is the true living God, and he will live forever. His kingdom will never be conquered. He will rule forever. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miracles in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the den of lions. From that day through the entire reign of Darius and Cyrus, Daniel was treated well. So with the king's proclamation, everyone would respect Daniel. I mean, now they've heard the story. And I have no doubt it spread faster than TikTok could do. They would all have to respect what the Medes and Persians would have referred to as the God of Daniel. What a mighty God we serve.